Oi, oi, it's your boy, Fabulous Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast coming at you on Monday, the 26th of July. And we had a couple of fights at the weekend. So we're going to chat about them. The big story, of course, was the return of TJ Dillashaw against Corey Sandhagen. Controversial decision in this main event. I felt like Sandhagen probably deserved to win on a round-by-round basis. But it was an excellent fight. I'm not going to be too mad about it. I think the real takeaways for me were Sandhagen looked better grappling than he did against Aljamain Sterling and did a better job of staying off the fence for long periods. And Dillashaw didn't. I mean, one of the things that I completely forgot to mention, last week I was getting so excited for the return of TJ Dillashaw, I forgot to go, oh yeah, he's 35 in this very, Aldo excluded and Edgar, but a very young division. A division where speed really matters. He could have turned up and just looked like shit, and that wasn't the case. It was a case that the guy Sandhagen definitely made him look bad on the feet, but definitely one of the toughest performances we've seen from TJ Dillashaw. Certainly, you're looking at that cut to 125 now and the knockout against Henry Cejudo, and I'm the biggest Henry Cejudo fan going, but I think you can definitely say that cut drained him if you look at what put him out in that fight versus what he was taking in this one. So there were a lot of surprises in this one, but there was also a lot of the stuff we talked about. We were talking about Sandhagen dropping away, letting TJ run himself forward onto punches and things, and there was a lot of that in this fight. There was a lot of either dropping away or shifting back into the opposite stance and then hammering him with counter jabs and counter straights as Dillashaw lunged forwards. There were quite a few moments where Dillashaw, and it seemed like, we talked about how they've been sparring partners before and stuff, and a lot of what Dillashaw does against these guys who've not fought him or not sparred him before is his feints and his movement really throw them off. This is still a sport where almost no one is throwing any fucking feints, and Dillashaw is like feinting the level change constantly. And in this one, you saw there were several moments where he feinted the level change and got caught with the jab as he was changing levels, and his knees just sort of froze up in that position for a second, and it looked like he was wobbled. And that, that's just getting caught doing something and out of position. And Sandhagen really got his timing down on that. But, the toughness really showed when Sandhagen timed him with what looked like a perfectly timed jumping knee as Dillashaw was ducking in. It bounced off Dillashaw's face, and Dillashaw grabbed a hold, and they were into like an upside-down triangle sort of scramble. But, to take that knee in the face, just like it was nothing, really impressive. But yeah, it looked like TJ Dillashaw was a step behind, and we talked about how, training with someone years ago is not going to be, they're going to have new stuff between now and then, or then and now rather. But you getting familiar with someone's timing, stuff that you can't really put into words, but just those little looks that people do. Dillashaw's been doing those little level change fakes and things for years now, and just being familiar with those is going to be such an advantage, and it really did look like it was for Sandhagen. Another thing we talked about that came up, if both fighters are stance switching, it's going to turn into a car crash, and it did. There was a lot of that going on, both of them switching stances and not being quite certain which stance the other guy was in when they started throwing their strikes. But even then, Sandhagen managed to, when Dillashaw went orthodox, he would time his shift to southpaw, slide down the outside of Dillashaw's lead leg, and hit him with a left hook with his backhand, or a wide left to the body. And that's something he was doing against Sunsao a lot. I really liked that. Didn't see a lot of hooking off the jab in this one. But then Dillashaw's not a guy who sort of stands still and covers up. And by the midpoint of the fight, Dillashaw had really set his mind to going forward and pushing Sandhagen to the fence. I think that was a good idea because he's cutting off the kicks at least. Even if you're getting jabbed up on the way in, you're going to hit the fence eventually. And we talked about in the pre-fight, I said, maybe don't go for legs as much, but attempt some of the modern cage work. The Habib throw by, whatever you want to call it, DC1, I think James Krause calls it, or DC2, is where you get a body lock under the arms along the fence. You step one leg inside their leg, so your hip's inside their hip, and then you turn towards your back leg. And sometimes you'll throw the guy to the floor, but a lot of the time he'll catch himself on his hands and you'll slip around behind him to his back. It's ubiquitous in MMA now. You'll see it everywhere. But Dillashaw was doing that, and of course that pairs with Sandhagen's tendency to turn the back and start fighting the hands, Sakuraba style. A very legitimate form of defending takedowns and turning back into people, freeing yourself, breaking their hands apart. Or if you can use the Kimura, you can turn standing wrestling exchanges into scrambling submission sort of attacking exchanges. Really, like if you are a good grappler and you don't have like a world-class wrestling pedigree, you should be using the Kimura as much as possible. But basically, that was Dillashaw's plan from the halfway mark, was just to tough it out and walk in on him. There was an interesting exchange, actually, because every time someone goes for a leg attack now, DC tells everyone that leg attacks are worthless or whatever. And, you know, it's kind of... Yes, he's got a point. Like, there are lots of examples of things like the Leonardo Santos one, where he goes for a leg reap, doesn't reap the leg, and the guy just hammer fists him in the head and knocks him out cold. But there's also Charles Oliveira sitting with the UFC lightweight title in the world's most competitive MMA division, and having got there by every time his back hits the mat, he starts attacking a leg. And part of that, you know, you've got to remember that he's got one leg attack submission, and that's a calf slicer. You know, he doesn't submit people with leg locks, but he goes for them like he wants to, and that makes people turn away. That makes people do stuff that they, you know, it's very hard to stand over Charles Oliveira and punch him in the head when he's trying to buckle your leg in and turn through on it every time you do anything. And Sandhagen and Dillashaw ended up in the 50-50 here, and Dillashaw stood over him and tried to throw his strikes. And while he was doing it, he was landing good strikes. While he was doing it, Sandhagen managed to get a good enough bite on the heel hook that it caused something in Dillashaw's leg to pop, and he went back and told his corner. The next round, he was very ginger on that leg. And then afterwards, he said that like the reason he wasn't putting hooks in when he got behind Sandhagen was that he was that his knee was busted up and he couldn't. Don't know what to make of that, but it is interesting because once you get behind someone like that, and we talked about this last week with Islam Makhachev versus number 15 ranked Thiago Moises, but when Moises got behind Makhachev, he jumped onto his back and fell over the top of him. And then when Islam Makhachev got behind Moises, he held that position, he kept returning him to the mat, didn't use an awful lot of energy, but kept hitting him every time he was on the mat, taking back the body lock every time he started standing up. And I think that's the thing that most people are pointing to when they say that they wanted Sandhagen to win. Not only was Sandhagen more effective on the feet, a lot of the grappling work, particularly the long time spent in the clinch with the back body lock, didn't really accomplish much. There was no damage being scored, and no mat returns were being performed, and he didn't get on his back at any point and start threatening a choke. It was positional domination, but in the most loose of those sort of terms. Yes, Khabib Nurmagomedov spent like 4 rounds in every fight in that position, but he was returning people to the mat and hitting them, and then they'd get up and he'd return to the mat again. Actually, on the subject of Khabib and mat returns and stuff, Sandhagen did a pretty good job actually early on with the Granbies, and this is something you saw against, you saw it from Sarukian versus Makhachev, you saw it in Khabib versus Abel Trujillo, you see it in every Tony Ferguson fight, you saw it in a lot of Diego Ferreira fights, the Rustam Habilov one especially, but Granbies seem to work very well early, and then the guy will get a read on it. Actually, DJ versus Cejudo too. The guy just explodes out with the Granby the first 2 times you take him down, and then the 3rd time it just stops working. The guy will sit on you and smother your hips before you go through. What I did like in the later rounds for Dillashaw, once he started getting back into things, I think it was round 3 or round 4, he really started to open up with kicks, and Sandhagen was saying like, oh, those leg kicks didn't hurt me, and he was calling them on and stuff. But what you saw was that TJ could kick with impunity because he wasn't particularly concerned about the takedown. I will say it was pretty cool that Corey Sandhagen attempted a takedown on him, and DC was like, well, he must be tired now. But honestly, that's one of the things I like about Sandhagen, like in the fight against Lineker. Everyone knows this guy is shit hot on the feet. But if you throw in the takedowns, then suddenly your level changes in your striking open up even more opportunities for you. So like I said, I really enjoyed it as a fight. I think really easy fight of the night. Actually, was it? It was actually a pretty good night of fights. But definite fight of the night contender. I had a lot of fun watching it. And one of those fights where you get a lot of skill as well as action. You know, those are the ones you always want to be showing people because, you know, even casual fans and people who watch fairly regularly can convince themselves that, like, if a fight's technical, it's a quote-unquote chess match and it's not fun. I think it was my boy Connery Bush. He tweeted famously, all chess matches start with a period of two guys staring at each other for most of the time. But yeah, chess match in MMA, bad term. But this was a really technical fight where both guys also took lumps out of each other, and physical attributes and toughness did really, I want to say carry the day, but depends on who you believe in terms of judging or who you believe should have won. But not a bad look for Sandhagen. I thought he did a really good job fighting in areas where, obviously TJ Dillashaw and Aljamain Sterling have different skill sets. TJ Dillashaw is much more of a straight-up takedown artist. The boxing into cool double legs with trips and things. Whereas Aljamain Sterling is much more of a funky ground sort of grappler. The guys like Chiesa, Kevin Lee, these guys who have good wrestling experience and ability to take people down, but they're very much searching for the submission or searching for positional betterment, whereas Dillashaw is much more about just the takedowns. So, it's important to note that they are very different fighters, but Sandhagen spent a lot of this fight defending from a position where Aljamain Sterling jumped on his back instantly and choked him out. So got some practice rounds in against a very, very good fighter, at least in what was a disastrous position for him in that fight. Where does it leave them both in the division? I don't even know. I can't keep up with what's going on in the bantamweight division at the moment. It's all sort of held up with the Aljo-Yan rematch. I can't tell you how much I hope Aljo comes out and has miraculously improved his striking to the point that he batters Yan, just because Yan fans are the worst people on earth. If you check out any Aljamain Sterling reply section, you just, fucking hell, who are these people? So what else was going on? Oh, your Aspen Lad versus Macy Chiasson co-main was cancelled. Fucking MMA online sphere immediately went, well, I heard it's because Aspen Lad tested positive. And then immediately it turns out that, no, it wasn't even Aspen Lad pulling out. It was the other lass was injured. So poor old Aspen Lad, because she's a girl with biceps, gets dragged through the mud again. On the subject of USADA, actually, with the TJ Dillashaw comeback and all that stuff, I just wanted to... Someone put up the full list of suspensions that USADA has made in the UFC, and you can check it out, and you can order it by name. You can order it by every column. You can order it by reason for suspension or the violation they committed. In the history of USADA in the UFC, 2 people have been caught for 3 whereabouts violations in a year. Now, if you don't know what the whereabouts violation is, Victor Conti talked about it on Joe Rogan years and years ago with regards to just like testing for Olympic sports. But a whereabouts violation is you say you're going to be somewhere and you're not there. And you're allowed 3 of them a year. And only 2 people have ever been caught for 3 in the UFC's history. And one of them was Nick Diaz, 2 years into him disappearing and being at clubs every night. So one person ever, Yair Rodriguez, has been tested 3 times when they couldn't find him. And the reason that it works is because testing is a very expensive process. Not only have you got to sort out all the testing equipment and getting that shit done, but random testing is an expensive project because you've got to hire a tester to turn up at whatever hour and watch you piss into a cup. So if you want to disappear to, I don't know, Europe for 2 weeks and blast roids, or Cuba, you want to go have some sugar water for 2 weeks, and you don't tell anyone you're doing it, the chances of you getting a randomly booked test 3 times in that period are almost none. So in case you're wondering why USADA has never caught anyone else high profile except TJ and John Jones once, that's why. So, co-main event, Roylian Paiva versus Kyler Phillips. Jesus Christ, Kyler Phillips, he impressed me so much against Song Yadong. And in this fight, he threw about 5 jabs and they all connected, but he led every attack with a right-hand lead, which is baller when Muhammad Ali does it in the opening round of his fight against George Foreman, because, as Norman Mailer said, none of Foreman's sparring partners for $50 a day were going to start trying to sucker punch him with straight rights off the bat. But if you do it at the start of every exchange, probably not going to catch him by surprise anymore. Other thing I loved about this fight, Kyler Phillips goes back to his corner. The guy in his corner goes, listen to your sensei, like he's teaching him Rick's Kwon Do. But yeah, lots of high kicks from Phillips, lots of right hand leads. Paiva did a pretty good job of like learning his timing throughout the fight. There was a really nice wheel kick into like frame with the lead hand and load up the rear elbow. Lots of counter elbow attempts from Phillips, which is a Nate Corbett style move. We always talk about this, but with elbows and knees, they're very short. You don't get a lot of wiggle room. If you throw a punch, if it connects at 70% extension or 100% extension, you're still connecting. Whereas that distance is, that area is much shorter on an elbow or a knee. So you don't get a lot of leeway. So you want to make sure they're either at the fence so that they're not backing off or moving into you. So counter elbows are always a great shout. But this one was just heaps of fun. Paiva gutted through some big shots early on, hit him back, fought his way back into the fight, some nice ground stuff going on. Really just a very fun fight, and Paiva got the majority decision. Another one that got some controversy, but again, close fought fight. Let's not go crying about robberies in hard fought wars, Actually, with Dillashaw and Phillips and Randy Costa also on this card, it really got me thinking about how high kicking with impunity should be more of a strategy in MMA. If you've got the flexibility to get your leg up quick, flexibility and control to get your leg up quick, very few guys good at catching and punishing high kicks. If you throw body kicks, you are going to get your leg caught because the guy will take the kick and then wrap his arm over it. Catching or controlling or parrying head kicks is a skill, and it's a skill that you don't see an awful lot in MMA. With the exception of like Kung Lee back in the day. Everyone's just taking him on one arm and going, oh, I'll get him back once I stop stumbling from him kicking me off balance. But like Dillashaw against Garbrandt and against Sandhagen, and anytime he's been able to kick freely, he's not knocking people out with these head kicks, but he is bumping them around. He's making it harder for them to come back, and especially like with Phillips and with also Randy Costa, as I'm going to talk about now, throwing high kicks keeps people's hands at home. You can with good body kickers, you throw a few body kicks, the guy will keep his elbow by his body, or when he punches, you can kick him in the body and really hurt him. But with head kicking, you can make the guy's hands stay at home, and you can also make him reluctant to duck or slip. And that's what I really liked about Randy Costa's first round against Yanez on this card. It came out, he faked with his right hip, and then he threw a jab and then a head kick off the same side. Off the right side again, really quickly. Hip feint, jab, high kick, and then he kept throwing this high kick up, coming right high kick against an orthodox fighter, so it's got to come over the shoulder. The right high kick, orthodox versus orthodox, or just right high kicks against orthodox fighters generally, is tricky because the body kick isn't so much there unless you've got the guy extending his arms towards you. You're going to be kicking into his back. You're going to give him the kick catch. You're going to, struggle to do damage. Whereas if you're kicking into the open side, which is a left kick against an orthodox fighter, you're kicking just into one arm. You can bust up their forearm. They have to keep their hand at home now. They can't just take it on their body because it's the front of their body and not their back, which is just muscle and gristle as opposed to vital organs. But with the right, when you're kicking like left kicks against an orthodox fighter, you have the option to go between the body kick and the high kick, which is why the southpaw double attack is body kick and high kick. You throw your back leg, which is your left leg, into their body and head, and you switch it up. You got a few inches difference between targets, and if they mess up at any point, you're going to dig in a good kick. When you flip that over and you're talking about like orthodox versus orthodox and you're using your right leg, you have to go between low kick and head kick. So you've really got to be able to turn, like you've basically got to be able to whip over a question mark in a very short space, which is what he was trying to do here. And it very much reminded me, because everyone says Yanez reminds them of Masvidal in the sort of upright stance, the douchey beard, but mainly the upright stance in the boxing. But against Masvidal, Wonder Boy was fighting both stances as he always does, but every time he threw his right leg, it was always like coming in low and then trying to arc up over that lead shoulder. And it works quite a bit if the guy's a square on sort of fighter, like both Masvidal and Yanez are. So that was very interesting watching Costa do that, because he established the high kicks very early, threw a ton of them, and then by doing that, he'd taken away, or he'd made Yanez reluctant to slip. So the jab was just there constantly. It's not like Yanez can't see a jab coming. I mean, he probably couldn't by the time that 8 or 9 had connected and blurred his vision. But, if I think if Randy Costa came out just trying to jab this guy, Yanez would have slipped and started coming back with counters. But because people are very reluctant to slip if you've been throwing up high kicks. Watch Ross Pearson's career. He'd have everyone dead to rights. If they were throwing jabs at him, he's slipping inside, coming up with left hooks. The moment they start throwing the ugliest little kicks you've ever seen, he's suddenly like, oh, I don't really want to duck my teeth into their shin bone. And he's standing upright and much easier to hit. But first round was all Costa. He looked fantastic. And then Yanez really pulled it back in the second round, pushed him to the fence, worked the body, and scored a beautiful uppercut up the middle. Basically, it was over once Costa hit the fence. He stood there, squared up, and, if you're dealing with a guy who can punch well in combination and pick his combinations well, standing along the fence with a cover-up is not even, it is absolute bare minimum defense you're doing. That's the reason that guys like Dominic Cruz, Israel Adesanya, they don't fuck around on the fence. Anderson Silva used to do it because he was fighting guys who didn't really know what to do, but fucking around on the fence is a great way to just give people who shouldn't be getting to you because of your footwork the chance to get back in a fight. But I thought that was a really good showing from Yanez. I didn't know a lot about Randy Costa. You'll remember from the previous episode, I was like, who the fuck is this guy with 6 fights taking on a hot prospect Yanez? And he gave a really good account of himself until he lost. I'm super psyched to see both of these guys again. I think I was actually more impressed with Costa because I'd never seen him do that before. And now I'm like, what an interesting style. I want to watch more of that. But that rear high kick and the hip feint where he pulls his rear leg up and then jabs out of it, really cool moves. Very, very Machida-esque, actually. But Machida didn't really go for the high kicks as much or as frequently, or really do anything as frequently as Costa does. Costa drives a high pace. What else was on this? Macy Barber versus Miranda Maverick. I'm currently writing Advanced Striking 2.0 Valentina Shevchenko. I know, it's what the people were clamoring for. This is my favourite move, being like, I'll give you my real thoughts on Valentina Shevchenko, but they're behind a paywall. No, I mean, she does have some very interesting stuff. When we're not doing the bit about how creepy her fans are and how shit her division is, she has some very interesting looks. But, so much of that is distance control, and I talk about it every time. I'll be talking about men's fights and talking about distance control, and I'll go, let me show you this example from a Valentina Shevchenko fight. But I'm writing about that, and literally on the other side of the screen, I've got Macy Barber versus Miranda Maverick playing, and they're both just, when the other person comes at them, they sprint backwards, and they halt, and they try and come back with a counter as the other person's sprinting backwards, and then they both end up on opposite sides of the cage, and then they have to come back together and sprint into each other again. It's just fucking awful fighting, And Macy Barber's now at Team Alpha Male, which, there's been some good strikers out of Team Alpha Male, but if you got like Uriah Faber teaching you to sprint and throw right hands, which is what he did for most of his career, you're probably not going to get much better. She desperately needs to go to a camp that's going to teach her to use her fucking footwork and stay a little bit closer to the opponent. Same with Miranda Maverick. I suppose I was less unimpressed with her because she didn't win the split decision, but Barber did, so I'm more angry at Barber. But both of them did not look great in this fight. Darren Elkins, he did the damage. The damage arrived. He was Derek Minner. Derek Minner was all over him and then hit a wall. And then Darren Elkins just sort of got on top and was like, oh, okay, I'll finish from here. And he's done it they kept saying on commentary. Commentary was insufferable this time. They were just, I like Fitzgerald. I like Dominic Cruz. But Daniel Cormier's like, who doesn't love sponsor brand, Brendan? Fucking shut up, DC. He's like a robot with platitudes that just change the blank, each time. DC's thoughts brought to you by Modelo. But they, you had to be pretty bad for Darren Elkins to get back in on you this time, now. The big one was obviously Mirsad Bektik, who at the time people were like, this is the next Fedor, look at his ground and pound. And now Bektik's retired, he really hit a wall in his career and just didn't get there. But Elkins, he's on a 4-fight losing streak. Volkanovski, Lamas, Hall, Landwehr, all of those are good except Landwehr. But, to get caught again by just like beating this guy until he came back like Homer Simpson. Very bad look for Minna. But, I'm a fan of Darren Elkins, so I'll allow it. Man, Darren Elkins' Tapology profile picture is pre the damage tattoo. I can't even remember a time when he didn't have the damage tattoo. It's the worst tattoo in the UFC, except Kay Hansen's monstrosity. It's like the Statue of Liberty, the American flag, and just all Americana shit down the side of her arm. Full sleeve. I always like Charlie Ward's full sleeve, which is just black. He's like, I want a black arm, please. He's like, I want Joe Frazier's left hook, and this is the best place to start. What else was interesting? Ian Heinisch got knocked out. I was quite surprised by that. Imavov, he came out in this stance, and they were saying what a good striker he was. I was expecting lots of high kicks and stuff. When he kicked, he looked like he'd never stretched his hamstrings, but his jab and his lead hand were pretty fucking sharp, and he knocked out Heinisch with I think like a little up jabby sort of thing he hit him with. Mickey Gall beat Jordan Williams, which brings Mickey Gall's record again. Or hang on, the record of opponents Mickey Gall has beaten in the UFC is something like 5-15 or 5-19. I forget what it is, but it's fucking abysmal. I have no idea where they keep finding these people to fight him. This bottom portion of the card was very strange because it was like people with UFC records against people making their debut who are just there to lose, basically. So Mickey Gall versus Jordan Williams, Sajara Eubanks versus Elise Reed. It's hard work to make Sajara Eubanks look like an absolute murderer. And then the interesting one was Hannah Goldie. I told you last week I'd never seen her fight, but like Jessie Jess, I knew that people were properly horny for her. But she gets in there, and just to give you some perspective, Sean Shirk would have 7 inches of reach on her. That's what we're dealing with. She's got a 60-inch reach. So she's in there trying to strike. And the best part was she's throwing like doubled up left kicks off the bat. She's going inside low kick, left high kick, not coming anywhere close, but she's doing it over and over again. And I was like, oh, it's like if Sean Shirk were Lumpini ready. Oh, and then Julio Arce, actually, I'll mention, because I firstly, I like him. Secondly, I put a little £1 bet on him and won. But he, on the betting site, was listed as Julia Arce fighting Andre Ewell. And it just it made me chuckle because fucking MMA Online is now doing Valentina versus Canelo, who would win in an MMA fight. So if we're doing intergender MMA, I'm afraid I already have betting slip proof that Julia Arce versus Andre Ewell happened. But Andre Ewell always been a weird, lanky striker who just reaches wildly for punches and things. And I think what you saw a lot was that being a southpaw protected him because the angles are different. When he was fighting another southpaw in Julio Arce, where your lead shoulder and lead arm are in the way of the right straight against another orthodox fighter, and so if you flip that against another southpaw fighter, your lead shoulder and lead arm should be in the way. His weren't. So Arce just kept landing this left straight over and over and over again, and eventually sparked him. Honestly, I know he wins fights, but every time I see Andre Ewell, he seems to lose. However, he won a split decision over Henan Brow, so he'll always have that. He beat one of the absolute pound-for-pound best fighters in the world at one time. I was thinking about Henan Brow again today, because like the TJ Dillashaw, there's 2 of his big wins, but there has never been a bigger fall from grace than Henan Brow. I just can't believe what happened with that guy. And when you look at him, like, even at the time, he didn't have an awful lot of skills. It was the right low kick, good jab, decent overhand, decent counterpunching, good top game, bad level changes for takedowns. When he got confused, he would lunge at people with his head down like Donald Cerrone. And then the odd spinning back kick when he was out of ideas. But his athleticism must have slipped so fucking far for it to just fall off that quickly. Crazy. Actually, you saw that in this fight. TJ Dillashaw, I think he got Sandhagen in to train for Dominic Cruz. So before that, he would have been working for the Barao fight. But the Barao fights, anytime Barao spun for the back kick, which he does when he's frustrated, or did when he was frustrated, Dillashaw would slide down his back, basically, behind him. The article I wrote at the time, Killing the King, Henan Barao, the one before the fight, I was saying you stay in the butt crack, basically. You treat it like a revolving door, and you stay in your section between his butt cheeks. And every time Sandhagen spun for a wheel kick or a back kick, Dillashaw was in that space. It was really impressive that he still has that just motor memoried in. The other thing that was really fucking funny was Sandhagen hit him like maybe a millisecond late at the end of the second round, and Dillashaw was like, come on! And Dillashaw, not only in this fight, was grabbing shorts and shit, but there is famously he like gets into fights in the gym, ended that lad's career, supposedly. The stories came out differently about that one, but at Team Alpha Male. But the footage of him sparring Takeru, where Takeru, the best bantamweight kickboxer in the world, he's going to give you some trouble, if you're a pure MMA fighter, or if you're an MMA fighter rather. And like the bell goes, and it happens twice. The bell goes, and Takeru drops his hands and starts walking away, and Dillashaw loads up a punch from behind him. And literally every other group of people in the gym is walking to get their water when this punch is thrown. But gym stuff's always, just the daftest. Like, I was watching a compilation of Michael Johnson gym wars, and if you've ever asked, like, how come Michael Johnson had these amazing wins over amazing fighters, but then fell off a fucking cliff, it's because he gets into gym wars all the time. There's footage of him, like, going life and death with Nicky Holskin for no reason. There's footage of him just escalating a sparring session with Robin van Roosmalen for no reason. And there's so much footage of him and Kamaru Usman just wailing on each other. Anyway, those were the fights that were. This weekend, aren't you psyched? We got Hall versus Strickland, a card that is absolute garbage. But the secret is, it's competing against Pitbull versus McKee, which is actually a good card. I'm going to be covering that next week, the Bellator card. So I expect very low viewership. But the UFC is going to put out the bare minimum, and based on name value, they will probably outperform this Bellator card, which is a real shame because it's a very good card. You got Patricio Pitbull versus AJ McKee, which is obviously the one everyone knows is happening. You got Mads Burnell versus Emmanuel Sanchez, basically for next contender for the title in the co-main event. You got Usman Nurmagomedov fighting, and then a load of Bellator names that are Bellator people. But there's some good fights on there compared to this fucking woeful Strickland versus Hall card. Oh, thank God, they've changed the co-main event. It was Sam Alvey on a 0-5-1 streak. But yeah, you're not tuning in to see... I was going to say, you're not tuning in to see Cheyenne Buys, but just before that, Hannah Yaya's throwing down. So, you know what? I might actually watch that. Of course I'm going to watch that. I've got to tell you guys about it and have opinions. Anyway, I reckon that'll do us for today. I'm going to go and continue writing various stuff for the Patreon boys. If you haven't read Advanced Striking 2.0 Mauricio Shogun Hua, it's good. Go check it out. If you want to become a Patreon... or a patron. No, if you want to become a Patreon boy, support the podcast, keep everything going, and just have my eternal gratitude, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack, locking DC in a cupboard so he can't do the interviews. Bless.